Doing next week has, however, been cancelled. So James Fraser will not be giving the talk online. So there won't be any talks that day. The next talk is then by Leonard Knox on the 2nd of December, on Friday, the 2nd of December. So we basically have 10 days before the talk. The other announcement I wanted to make is we have now a date for those of you who will be with us next semester for the reception, for the follow reception in January. So it's going to be on January 13th and at 1:30 p.m. So 2-hour block. It's going to be here. We have some like wintry things, hot cider, and that kind of things. And so you're all invited to join us for this event to celebrate the returning and new fellows at the center next semester. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce someone most of you, I am sure maybe all of you know, Laura Gradowski, who is our postdoc at one of our 2 postdoctoral fellow at the center. She completed her PhD at CUNY in 2022. She works mostly, as we might guess from the title of the talk, on fringe theory. She's done really some fascinating work in the history and philosophy of science. It's an extremely HPAC project, and we've been really happy to have her at the center. She also works on philosophy of mind, and she's done some work on consciousness as well. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's very nice.
She's got very radical views on the matter, actually. So I'm actually really looking forward.
Okay, yeah. All right, so in this talk, I'm going to argue that the global epistemic community of scientists and the public that depends on science should be less intolerant towards fringe theories. So the term fringe is often used as a way of dismissing or disparaging a theory. So here's an example from Kevin Smith, who provides a characteristically dismissive statement. He says, the notion that homeopathic preparations could have any biological effects represents a fringe viewpoint, one not entertained by serious scientists nor supported by reason and evidence. So, but even advocates of pluralism, minority reports, and heterodox thinking also tend to qualify their views as that they don't mean fringe theories, right? So we saw at John Bickel's ALS talk during the Q&A, somebody asked him, well, what about like fringe theories? Is that what you mean? And he's like, no, I don't. And I heard Hyson Dangs at the PSA advocating minority reports went through a series of objections, one of which was, you mean like fringe theories? And she was like, oh, no, I don't mean fringe theories, right? So everybody's qualifying their pluralism, and they're wanting to be more tolerant in general with not the fringe. So I realize this is going to push some buttons. So that's the point. A lot of us are conservative, right? And I mean, I think there's more people who are tolerant here than most other places I've been, which has been pleasant. So I don't want to point fingers at anyone here that they're intolerant. But, so the intolerance, why are we intolerant? So one reason is that it seems to keep science safe from infiltration of theories that lack evidence. It protects precious resources like money, lends credibility to science if we're not letting in all these wild ideas. And we don't want the public to be taking up fringe theories. And for intolerant, it might prevent the circulation of misinformation, false facts, and fake cures. And it also helps maintain the supremacy of scientific experts in decision-making, like for policies and things that affect the public. So I just want to give a quick example of a fringe theory that people were very intolerant to, the mainstream archaeologists at the time. And Frank Gaudio was is a statistician. He also worked for the UN. He's not an archaeologist, but he got an idea. He quit his job, got an idea to start looking for Heraklion, which was inspired by Herodotus's account. And he was motivated by a Royal Air Force pilot who'd seen conspicuous shadows in the water. And he decided to go out and look for this sunken city. And at the time, in the 1990s, underwater archaeology was like not a thing. Here's some pictures of the discovery of Heraklion. So he was successful. But even after he discovered this city, several archaeologists declined to attend a conference hosted by Oxford University because of their worries about Oxford's ties to a private underwater archaeologist. They would argue that contracting out the leadership of maritime digs to non-scientists sets a poor precedent. So some examples of these kinds of statements include George Fletcher Bass, who said archaeology should be conducted by proven and trained archaeologists. John Adams, another archaeologist, said, I'd be wary of parceling out one of the links in the chain of science. So even these more fringy people, like the fringy archaeologists who were already looking at doing some underwater stuff, were dismissive. And didn't want to engage. And it almost looks like in this case, the fringe exclusion is valued over and above the scientific research itself. So that's just to give a flavor of the kinds of views that are had, but I'll get more into the intolerance in detail. But first I want to talk about what makes a theory fringe. I'm going to establish that there is intolerance, if I haven't already. And then I'm going to give an inductive argument for decreased intolerance towards fringe theories. So an argument for more tolerance. And then what is the limit? So let's start with what makes a theory fringe. Well, first of all, why am I using this term fringe? It's not a term we tend to use in philosophy. It's a very popular term right now. The news and the media, it has the breadth to encompass a variety of more nuanced categories, like pseudoscience, deviant science, unorthodox science, paranormal studies, quackery, and so on. And there's literatures surrounding all of these more nuanced theories, and I think fringe has the ability to capture all of those. So I'm defining fringe broadly. Another reason I like the word fringe is that it's semantically neutral. I mean, and despite negative associations, even rugs have fringes, right? Beams of light have fringes. Truth, conditions, and logic have fringes. It's also descriptively accurate at the same time. So it implies the marginality. That's my concern. Another reason I'm using fringe is I found it to be a very useful lens for studying theory change. So in a lot of cases of philosophers studying theory change, we tend to limit ourselves to a very short time frame. And fringe kind of just like expands the scope of the relevant history. So we'll see some of that as we go through the talk. And another reason is that it is used in policies. Okay, so let's differentiate between the fringe and the mainstream. Those are some funny images, but there's pop culture references. I haven't seen the movie Mainstream, nor have I seen the TV show Fringe. But clearly these are terms that are popular right now. So I'm just going to start by giving some examples of fringe theories and the mainstream theories that they're inconsistent with. So morphic resonance, it's Rupert Sheldrake's view, right, that goes against the theory of evolution and other theories as well. 5G theory for disease, right, goes against the germ theory of disease. Creation science goes against the Big Bang. Water memory, this was taken up by homeopathists at various points. Goes against allopathic medicine. Oh, I skipped flat earth, maybe for a good reason. Yeah, that's our laughter is a great example of our intolerance. Even I laughed. All right, so electric universe goes against relativity theories. Phlogiston goes against atomic theory. Phlogiston was once mainstream, but it can also go the other direction. The panspermia hypothesis, this idea that meteorites brought life to Earth, goes against the endosymbiosis hypothesis, which was once fringe. And well, Atlantis doesn't go against Troy, but this is just this is an example of a city that we think is mythical. We argue it doesn't exist, right? So I'm just comparing the two there. And then let's talk a little bit about the qualities of mainstream theory, since I'm going to define fringe in relation. So mainstream theories are held by the relevant specialized experts in a field. They are often found in top-tier peer-reviewed journals. They're used in academic and institution-based research. They inform scientific methods and medical practices, and they influence policy and the public. And I'm going to say that fringe theories are none of these things. We don't see them in journals. We don't see them being used by experts or top scientists. They don't tend to influence policy. There may be cases in which they do. So other people have started, mainly in history and in sociology, discussing the fringe in academic literature. So here's a paper by Gary Collins and his colleagues called Demarcating Fringe Science for Policy. And they offer some more sociological criteria for demarcating fringe science from mainstream science. So I think this is a kind of a nice start. But their criteria include two criteria that are actually for mainstream science, right? So being coherent and authoritarian and individualistic, those are both features of mainstream science. Whereas 3 through 8, those other 6 are characteristics of fringe science, and those include a theory being past its sell-by date, individualism, but pathological individualism, being primarily oppositional, having a revolutionary intent, being counterfeit or norm violating, and having an oblique orientation. So, I mean, I'm just putting this up here to show that other people have started talking about this. I'm not taking up these views. This is a more sociological perspective than I would like to take. And my focus is on fringe theories, in this talk at least, fringe theories more specifically. So let's talk a little bit about intolerance. I'm going to put tolerance and intolerance on a continuum, just to get us start thinking about what these things are. So we tend to think of our intolerance as a kind of skepticism, like maybe a healthy skepticism about fringe theories. And we tend to think of tolerance as a sort of anything goes view, right? Feyerabend is our main character here. And I want to say that that's not really the right characterization. So intolerance is not this believing nothing, as like Socrates might have said. And intolerance is not believing everything. Right. So I actually think that intolerance is kind of comes with a form of knowing, right? We think we know what the matters of fact are in science, right? So, and it's almost might even call it a kind of dogmatism, this knowing that is intolerant against other alternative facts, right? Whereas tolerance is more of a not knowing. I don't know, right? So I'm not arguing here that fringe theories are all true, right? I'm arguing that we don't know. And it doesn't mean that, you know, we have to believe in flat earth theory, right? Okay, so this is how I would characterize epistemic tolerance. So I would call it an attitude or intellectual disposition to seriously entertain alternative theories as real or true. It's an open-mindedness about the way things really are. And with this disposition comes the flexibility to adopt alternative theoretical perspectives on the facts in a given observational domain. And as for epistemic intolerance, I'll give a bit more treatment in terms of examples. So we'll talk about what it is, who is doing this, where and how is it manifest, and how common is it? So it manifests in a lot of different ways. I'm going to focus on two particular areas where it tends to occur. First, in institutions, we see intolerance happening in peer-reviewed journals, academic jobs, conferences, inability to get funding for research, getting students, inability to get students. And then we also see it in internet gatekeeping, which is a sort of new form of a new space for intolerance to take its charge. So we get gatekeeping with pop blogs, mainstream media and the news, social media platform policies and bans, and Google searches. So let's look at institutional gatekeeping to start. I'm going to focus on one particular area, namely peer-reviewed journals. So here are some examples of intolerance that was harmful to scientific progress. So one is Lynn Margulis's 1967 paper where she proposed the endosymbiosis hypothesis. And it was rejected by about 15 journals before it was finally accepted. And there had been others who had formulated the hypothesis before Margulis. And it took at least another decade after she proposed it for it to be taken up in mainstream research. Another example is John Garcia's papers, which demonstrated conditioned taste aversion. And these were rejected by APA journals for about 2 decades, a little more maybe. So Paul Rosen was a psychologist who helped conditioned taste aversion become mainstream. And he told me that Estes, who was the chair of, or the editor-in-chief of JCPP, actually admitted that his rejection of Garcia's papers were the biggest mistake he ever made as a journal editor. So another example is continental drift. There were a few publications. So it was first proposed in 1912, and there were some publications early on, but eventually, you know, once it was refuted, right, then it stopped showing up in any publications in mainstream journals. So, and there are no publications at all in Nature before 1960, as though no self-respecting geologist in the Northern Hemisphere was prepared to risk his reputation by publishing a full-length article on continental drift. More likely, I think it was worries about the journal's reputation. Okay, let's look at some examples of internet gatekeeping. I think exacerbates the problem of intolerance that I see. So I'm going to look at a policy on YouTube and a policy on Wikipedia. So these are in the top 10 most viewed websites in the world. So I think that this has an impact. I mean, I've seen people at the center on Wikipedia looking things up. So, I mean, we're, you know, and we're good people, right?
Speak for yourself.
Okay, so here is Wikipedia actually has a policy about fringe theories specifically. So they define fringe theories as an idea or collection of ideas that depart significantly from the prevailing or mainstream view. It can include work done to the appropriate level of scholarship in a field of study, but only supported by a minority of practitioners, to more dubious work. And I think that's a nice definition, actually. So examples include pseudoscience, conspiracy theories, alternative medicine, pseudohistory, and so forth. And if we were to click on this little button here, we get a whole article that includes guidelines and policy regarding fringe theories, and specifically states that a fringe theory must be explicit about its marginal status, or in other words, describe itself as pseudoscientific. It's also the gist of what it says in some bits. But, you know, they even say here, not all fringe theories are pseudoscience, right? So not all of them are going to have to describe themselves that way. But we do see it come up a lot on Wikipedia. On Wikipedia, there's actually an entire like 200 something theory list of pseudoscientific theories. It's a great place to look if you're looking for like what the mainstream view is. So here's the page of Immanuel Velikovsky, and I just want to tell a quick anecdote. I did a little Wikipedia experiment where I attempted to update the Immanuel Velikovsky page by adding some quotes regarding Einstein's reception of Velikovsky's work, which were pretty mixed, mostly negative, right? I added them to the criticism section. And within 24 hours, they were removed. And there was some back and forth about that. You can go on the Immanuel Velikovsky page and look this up. You can go to the talk page and read my correspondence with this guy, Jason Colavito, who cited a blog in response to the quotes I used from a historian, Michael Gordon's book on Velikovsky. Yeah, cites a blog post which is against Wikipedia's guidelines. And yeah, I mean, this is pretty discouraging. Like I wasn't going to try again. And not that I was trying to test it out, see what would happen. I didn't think it would happen that fast. And Michael Gordon was funny about it. He was like, well, he would never, get into Wikipedia Bloodsport, but he thought, it was funny that there are actually still people out there who even care about Velikovsky today. And yes, there are. And now I'm going to move on to Wikipedia or YouTube. So YouTube has misinformation policies that prohibit certain kinds of information, and specifically They don't allow things that contradict expert consensus on certain safe medical practices. So basically any medical fringe theory is automatically banned from YouTube. Now I'm just going to look at some popular attacks on the fringe. So I don't know if anyone's heard of the Nobel disease. It's a relatively new diagnosis where if you are a Nobel laureate, you're very likely to go fringe. This is a phenomenon that is getting discussion and journals like or magazines like the Skeptical Inquirer. We also get a lot of intolerance showing up in blogs. This is one blog called The Reason Stick, which basically tries to dismiss fringe theories, but this guy has actually kind of created a lot of interesting diagrams, categorizing fringe theories in different ways. Right, so here's his first go at it. Venn diagram of irrational nonsense.
So Scientology hits everything, right?
Yeah. It's cool, right?
Yeah.
I like it. There's a periodic table. It's pretty great. On the left, you get like extraterrestrial theories. Hopefully people can see that, but you can look it up. And so it got even bigger after a few years, version 5.0. So this guy, Crispian Yago, he also collaborated with an artist to come up with a deck of cards called the Skeptic Trumps. So these are like the skeptics, people that I would say are have expressed intolerance towards fringe theories. And in here you get their like superpowers. Massimo Pigliucci's is his special power is rationally speaking.
We're men.
It's very diverse.
Yeah.
There are a few women, but these are the people who I felt were most prominent. Yeah, there's like 3 women or something in the deck. But yeah, they're mostly men. All right. So one other I guess evidence of intolerance is the stigma that comes with fringe theories. And the Pentagon actually released a statement about unidentified aerial phenomena, which is their new term for UFOs. And in this report, this is last year. So, I mean, I think a lot of people actually haven't been hearing much about this. Yeah, this came out last year in 2021. And they presented 144, or they discussed 144 reports from military officials, observations using multiple sensors of UAP. And they discuss in this statement collection challenges. And one of those is sociocultural stigmas. That is an obstacle to collecting data on UAP. And throughout the report, they bring this up a few times. And they say, you know, this is actually harming scientific research. And this is the Pentagon's report. So the upshot here is just that intolerance is common in both popular and academic contexts. And now what I want to do is give an argument for more tolerance towards fringe theories. So really what I'm doing is I'm going to give you, I could give it a longer argument for tolerance, but I'm going to give an argument against intolerance, just given the time constraints. So my first premise is that scientists were intolerant towards fringe theories that later became mainstream. My second premise is that this intolerance led to delays in important research. And my conclusion is that scientists' intolerance towards fringe theories will continue to delay important research. So I'm going to look at 3 cases, one from geophysics, continental mobilism, more commonly referred to as continental drift, biomedicine, the germ theory of disease, and conditioned taste aversion in psychology. I'm going to try to just give a little tidbit for each one of these of the intolerance that scientists expressed towards these theories that became mainstream. Okay, so continental mobilists were, I mean, the original that we know of is Alfred Wegener, but there are many, many, many more before him who were proposing mobilist theories of the earth. Marie Tharp was a scientist who helped map the ocean floor. She got all the data points were sent to her, and she mapped it data point by data point. And she ended up, as she was doing this data point by data point, she ended up noticing that in the mid-ocean ridge, there was this rift valley. And it was starting to appear as she went. She mentioned it to Bruce Heason, her colleague, and Heason explained it cannot be, it looks too much like continental drift. And he dismissed her interpretation that this was a rift valley as girl talk. So, I mean, and this is a theory that it took, so Bruce Heason is actually kind of a good guy in this story, but I mean, he, was dismissive initially. And the mainstream uptake happened about 50 years after Wegener's first proposal, over 50 years. So, I mean, this is a pretty famous case. Probably people have heard about this. So that's Marie Tharp. That's their map that was published in National Geographic. And this I just wanted to throw in to show that the proposals of fringe theories are looking at history and looking at theory change in terms of fringe theories can make us look at a vastly wider scope than we would normally look at. So most people who write about continental drift are looking at like the 1960s. And here I am looking at like 1570 through 1920. So I think it's interesting too, the curve that you see here. These are all of the people I could find who proposed continental mobilist views. Okay, so next example, the germ theory of disease. I think people have heard of Semmelweis, maybe some people. So he, especially during the COVID era, we heard some stories about him, right? He advocated antiseptic hand washing. And he had a germ theory of puerperal fever or childbed fever. And that led him to be dismissed from his position at the Vienna General Hospital. And at the time, people believed in the miasma theory of disease, and they thought the childbed fever was just due to atmospheric, cosmic, terrestrial conditions of Vienna. Semmelweis's first proposal was in 1861, and it was eventually taken up in the 90s. And here's some nice illustrations of the miasma theory of disease. So the miasma theory stated that diseases are caused by these noxious airs that emanate from swamps and gross stuff. So Semmelweis's antiseptic hand washing technique was not implemented, and this was due to entrenchment in the miasma theory. And it excluded the possibility that an invisible germ could travel on the hands of a gentleman. So one of the top doctors at the time, this was his response, but a gentleman's hands are clean. And there's, this is, Megs goes on, say some pretty wild things here. Okay, third example is conditioned taste aversion, the Garcia effect, you might know it as, right, this went against the behaviorist learning theory, right? So there were, I talked a little bit about Garcia's papers getting rejected by APA journals. I just thought that, this is actually a pretty famous quote, and nobody actually knows who said it. But it was an investigator who actually works on delayed reinforcement. So it is surprising that like even somebody who worked in Garcia's kind of area of research was rejecting these results, saying these findings are no more likely than bird shit and a cuckoo clock. And this is a case where it took about 20 years for mainstream uptake. Okay, so let me just briefly consider a couple objections. I'm sure there will be many more. So first objection comes from John Norton. It's a good one, I think, that this is a sampling fallacy, right? That scientists are intolerant towards more fringe theories that do not ever become mainstream. And that seems like a good reason to continue being intolerant, or to not really worry about our intolerance too much. So my reply here is that yes, that's true. Fringe theories more often do not become mainstream, never see the light of day. But my thinking is that even a single case of our intolerance getting in the way of scientific progress that could save lives, like the way the germ theory of disease could save lives, is enough to consider checking our tolerance. And actually, these cases are pretty common, more common than we tend to think. So here are some other examples of fringe theories that are now mainstream, and this is just a relatively small selection. There are a lot of these. And yeah, none of the examples that I've already talked about should be up there, except for Gradowski, I guess. So those are all new ones. All right, another objection is that these aren't fringe theories broadly construed, but these are just like the promising cases. So my response here is that these cases were not thought to be promising at the time, and they actually went against most of our scientific standards at the times they were proposed. So I'll say a bit more about our best scientific reasons working against fringe theories that became mainstream. But first, I just want to give a few other reasons in case you aren't convinced by my inductive argument, a few other reasons to consider being less intolerant towards fringe theories. So first, I think this is pretty obvious that entertaining fringe theories can help people generate ideas, can strengthen the mainstream, right? If you consider how a fringe theory is responding to a mainstream theory, for example, right? It could make mainstream theorists check their evidence, right? It can ameliorate anomaly neglect, something I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. And I think that fringe theories are actually less harmful when they're taken seriously. I think part of the problem is the intolerance towards them that makes them kind of react aggressively. And of course, suppressing the fringe can violate free speech. And we saw this with COVID. There was a report from Amnesty International about silencing and free speech. But let me just say something about observational ignorance and anomaly neglect. So often in these cases where a fringe theory became mainstream, the experts of the day demonstrate theory entrenchment to the point that they're unable to acknowledge anomalous observations, and they neglect underexplored domains. So, for example, with Alfred Wegener, when he used evidence of the jigsaw fit of the continents, some geologists dismiss this as an illusion. Another example is that there can be an attentional deficit resulting from theoretical expectations. So some of the fixist geologists were not paying attention to the evidence Wegener was using. So, for example, he was looking at cross-continental fossils in paleontology, and finding that there were land animals both in Africa and in South America, and same species. How could this be? Right, and mainstream geologists were not going to listen to that data. Okay, so the upshot here is that intolerance can be harmful to scientific progress. Okay, so now I want to talk about what the limit is. What should tolerance look like? We've seen characterization of intolerance. I think it'd be good for me to say a little bit more about what I mean by tolerance, and what are the reasonable limits of that. So I'm going to push this far. If you didn't already know. So our scientific reasons that might support intolerance have actually betrayed scientists in the past. And that will be how I push this far. And then I'll look at the tolerance we're left with and suggest some options for drawing limits. So here are the best scientific reasons that I have found to support intolerance towards fringe theories or to dismiss a fringe theory. These are pretty good reasons. I would love to, if anybody thinks of something that I missed, I would love to hear it. So first, theories inconsistency with established theories or facts. The second is it's problems with evidence, basically. Failed predictions, lack of reproducible evidence, cherry picking, ad hoc tweaks, and so on. Lack of a mechanism is the third one. Lack of coherence. Lack of parsimony or its ontological profligacy. So invoking magic or similar. A proponent's use of improper methodology or experimental designs. And the last is proponents' lack of relevant expertise. So all of these reasons were used to dismiss magnetoreception. Magnetoreception is ability in animals, some animals, to sense the Earth's magnetic field in their navigation. Recently, human magnetoreception has actually become part of mainstream research as a subconscious perceptual ability that we have. That took a lot of work and a lot of guts by some scientists who were ridiculed for their work. And famous cases of Robin Baker, who ran these experiments called the Manchester experiments, where he basically took students in a bus, blindfolded them, and drove them out into the middle of nowhere and told them to point in the direction of home. And they did so successfully. and actually did so better than when they weren't blindfolded, which is interesting. But then they tried to replicate these experiments in the US in Princeton, and didn't work. And Baker ended up leaving academia, kind of just, stopped researching magnetoreception. He gave up. So the field was, fallow for years. But there was another guy, Joseph Kirschvink, who took up his torch and found that the human brain does respond to very weak magnetic signals like those of the Earth, and it's starting to get. He's at Caltech. It's starting to get taken up into mainstream research. Right, but magnetoreception, I mean, this is like a sixth sense. So, like, of course, it was dismissed as like that's like just magic, right? It's like ESP, like that's crazy, right? That's what people thought. So the upshot here is that our best scientific reasons combined can be insufficient for excluding a fringe theory. So I think we should be tolerant even towards theories that commit these 7 sins. So where should we draw the line? Where I want to draw the line is at denialism. I would push it as far as denialism. So denialism meaning naysaying, basically. So I don't think denialism is a theory. Right, so denying Einstein's relativity theory is not a theory. Like that's work on Einstein's theory. So I think just that on its own is not enough to say that we have a theory here. And I don't think you need to add denialism to your view to have an alternative theory of some phenomenon. So I guess that's maybe pushing it even further than Feyerabend, who draws the line at crankery, which I'm on the fence about. So crankery is just people who aren't willing to listen, like they're not engaged in debates and a community of scientists. I don't think a person has to be engaged in the community of scientists to do science, but you might convince me otherwise. Another place we might draw the line is at harmful theories. I think we should let harmful theories in because theories that were once deemed harmful are now deemed beneficial. Vaccination, for example. So another place we might draw the line is where the virtues of successful cases end. So let's look at the fringe theories that were successful and try to pick out what good qualities they have and draw the line wherever those good qualities end. But I hope to have at least convinced you to think a bit about your intolerance and scientists' intolerance. And I would hope that you could choose your own adventure. Since I'm taking this pretty far, I know most people won't be on the same page. And I would like to make a little call for fringe studies in HPS. I think there's a bunch of questions that need answering here, a bunch of research areas that are open for people to start thinking about. Some examples. One thing I think would be really cool to do is make an encyclopedia of fringe theories that became mainstream as a resource that could help people study these cases in more depth and look at similarities between them. Right, so seeking commonalities amongst the fringe theories that became mainstream. It'd be interesting to get some data on the number of years it takes a fringe theory to become mainstream. Be cool to do more research on fringe theorists themselves, like what qualities do they have? research on fringe theories that were lost to history. Just because a theory never became mainstream doesn't mean it's worthless. It's my view. And it also, like, if we do more fringe studies, we can re-examine a lot of the theory changes we've already looked at with a wider scope and a keener lens. Yeah. So the last thing is that paying serious attention to marginalized epistemic communities could happen if we start doing more fringe studies. There are a lot of theories and observations that are underrepresented in public education and in decision making. We see this a lot with indigenous science. And I think there are a lot of other cool areas that we could research. Like, one thing that would be really cool to do is look at how many fringe theories, how many theory changes were from fringe and how many theory changes were from mainstream. And have a look at that, and maybe that would throw some more skepticism on our skepticism. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
So we take a 5-minute break for coffee and then we come back.
No.
It's funny how you already raised your hand. They were like, "Oh, damn it!" Yeah.
Very
nice slide. Yes, you don't. There was a moment where I saw people's faces kind of like, no, like the opposite. Like people were like,